Most people know about the Salem witch trials, but what if I told you that New York City once went through its own version of that hysteria? Only this time, it wasn't witches. It was fire, paranoia, and the fear of a massive slave rebellion. Dozens of people were executed, some burned alive, and hundreds more were ruined. This is the story of the 1741 New York slave conspiracy panic, one of the darkest and most forgotten chapters in early American history. Welcome back to Raw American History, where we dig into the stories that textbooks usually leave out. If you thought that New York was always about commerce, freedom, and opportunity, this story just might change the way you see it. In 1741, New York was a very different city. It was a small but growing port town of around 10,000 people, and about 1 in 5 of them were enslaved Africans. Now, that is a huge percentage when compared to what most people picture when they think of the North in colonial times. Tension was everywhere. Poor whites, indentured servants, and enslaved people often living side by side in crowded neighborhoods. Jobs were scarce, food prices were high, and resentment was boiling just beneath the surface. Oh, and on top of all of that, just 2 years earlier, the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina had terrified colonists all along the coast. News of enslaved Africans rising up and killing dozens of whites spread quickly. So when strange things started happening in New York, fear spread like wildfire, literally. In March of 1741, a fire broke out at Fort George, the main British military installation in the city. It destroyed the governor's mansion and part of the fort itself. Just a week later, more fires broke out. Then more, and in some cases, multiple fires flaring up on the same day. Pretty soon, the colonists were convinced that this wasn't coincidence. Someone had to be behind it, and in their minds, the most obvious suspects were the city's enslaved Africans. Authorities went into panic mode. They rounded up enslaved men, poor whites, and anyone who seemed suspicious. People whispered about a massive conspiracy. Enslaved Africans were supposedly planning to burn down the city, massacre the white population, and set up a new black kingdom in New York. It sounds wild now, I know, but at the time, colonists believed it. And once fear takes hold, it doesn't take much to keep feeding it. By the spring, nearly 200 people had been arrested. The trials relied on almost no hard evidence. Instead, the prosecution leaned heavily on confessions, many of them extracted under torture, and the testimony of one person, a teenage servant girl named Mary Burton. Burton was pressured to testify, and the more names she gave, the more the authorities believed her. She painted a picture of a massive underground plot involving enslaved Africans, poor Irish servants, and even tavern owners. With that, the trials snowballed. Dozens of people were convicted, and some were even sentenced to death. The punishments were absolutely brutal. 30 black men and 4 white men were executed. Some were hung, but others were burned alive at the stake in public. A medieval-style punishment meant to terrify the entire community. Another 70 or so enslaved people were either banished from New York or sold off to the brutal sugar plantations of the Caribbean. For many, that was basically a death sentence, and by the summer of 1741, New York had turned into a city of public hangings, fire, and fear. So, here's the big question. Was there actually a slave conspiracy in New York? Historians are still divided, but most do agree that the evidence points to no. There might have been small groups of enslaved people talking about resistance, because, well, that was always a reality under slavery. But the idea of a massive, coordinated plan to burn the entire city and overthrow the government, that was almost certainly a paranoid fantasy. Instead, what we see is a society already on edge. The ruling class was terrified of rebellion, terrified of poor whites and black people forming alliances, and eager to find a scapegoat for the city's problems. Fires were the spark, but racism and fear were the fuel. The 1741 panic is often called New York's witch hunt. Just like Salem 50 years earlier, it shows how hysteria can spiral out of control when fear and prejudice take over. But this time, it wasn't witches, it was enslaved Africans. people who already had almost no rights and no voice in the system. It's also a reminder that slavery wasn't just a Southern institution. New York City, the financial capital of the future United States, was built with enslaved labor and scarred by racial violence. The slave conspiracy panic of 1741 is a story that deserves to be remembered, not buried. It shows just how fragile justice can be when society is ruled by fear, and how quickly innocent lives can be destroyed when a community convinces itself of a threat that isn't really there. But if you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment down below with your favorite thoughts, and subscribe to Raw American History for more forgotten stories from America's past. Because history isn't always clean, it's raw.